Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of the Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field. Then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Well, greetings and welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. We're talking today about right to repair. This is a hot topic, and we got a lot of opinions on this from all corners of agriculture. What's interesting is I'm bringing you a perspective from somebody that frankly doesn't even have a corner in agriculture. He's not an agricultural guy, but he has a lot to share about this topic of right to repair or made to repair or where this whole thing goes. And as he said in the warm-up before I hit the record button, why do I care? Because, Damian, this is a continuum. So we're going to talk about what this means, where this thing goes, why it matters to you, why it maybe doesn't matter. More importantly, why does it matter to this guy who's my guest, Fred Simkin? Fred Simkin, of all things, is a New Jersey guy. He's not an agricultural guy. And he ran across me on LinkedIn when I was talking about the great advancements we have made in farm machinery. And I will stand by this. As a kid that has hearing damage today from being on open air tractors, I'll probably have skin cancer soon from being out in the air on a tractor that could get done as much in a day as now modern machinery can get done in about an hour. I'm a big fan of forward progress, technological innovation when it comes to growing and producing our crops. But along with that, I know that there have been some that said, yeah, but these new machines can't even touch them. And I've heard these arguments. So we're going to delve into right to repair, can you repair, made to repair, planned obsolescence, all those sorts of things as it pertains to the machines that we use to create the bounty that feeds all of us. Fred Simkin, thanks for being on here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I said I wasn't going to do it, but I guess I have to do it. You're a Jewish guy in New Jersey. You're middle-aged and then some, based on me seeing you here. You came across me on LinkedIn commenting about this, and I thought, who is this guy? And I guess the thing is, you're pretty far from what I would say is the person that's impacted by this. When I think of my farmer buddies in Nebraska that are out there that have $3 million of farm machinery, they're in the trenches every day with farm equipment, and $3 million might not be nearly enough. Why do you care? You don't farm land. You aren't from an agricultural background. How did this whole thing come to you?
We mentioned when we talked just before we started this notion of the continuum. We exist in a society with more and more complex machinery, which we're dependent on. And increasingly, the manufacturers have closed the boxes, whether it's my end of the world, software or hardware. And you can no longer open your computer, look at the panels, change the power supply, or farm machinery, which we all depend on. I mean, I got to eat. Yeah. My wife has to eat. Yeah. We work at the local food bank. We see that, we see the fruits of the labor of the people that are watching this, then we're dependent on that. I can't pop the hood on my car anymore. Without special tools to just pull the plugs or the cowl.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned this before I hit the record button, Fred. You said, all right, why do I care? And I almost wonder if your background, because you're an IT guy, is that right? Artificial intelligence space. You're an engineer. By the way, did you come about it like mechanical engineer, applied? What kind of an engineering background even got you into the space of software and hardware?
I was working. My family had a construction company, so I was working in the U.S. and then in Latin America. Where I actually got to ride around and push some cows around a dairy farm for a while.
Mhm.
Uh, I and when we got back to the States after a while, my wife says, "You really like this computer stuff," and I'm really getting tired of going to places where it's either too hot or too cold, and so I went back to school. And I
Okay.
had a professor who was at NASA. We were living in Houston. He was at NASA Clear Lake, and he said, "Fred, artificial intelligence," this was in the 1980s, "artificial intelligence is the technology of the future." And I actually believed him.
Yeah.
And 38 years later, here I am.
Yeah. Well, and it is, and it was, and I guess it will continue to
And
be.
always will be.
And always will be. All right, so let's move forward. So you came into this thing really as an outsider, and obviously it's a hot button because you hopped on me on LinkedIn when I was heralding the advancements in farm machinery, and then you said, "Yeah, but you can't fix it." And I'm going to just go ahead and tell you this: my initial reaction to right to repair is, you can't fix this stuff anyhow. You yourself said before we hit record that you had a straight block 6 and a 1948 Mercury or something like that. I grew up on a farm. I'm not a mechanic, but I could sure as hell make a Chevy 350 engine and an old pickup truck run. I can't do that with my modern pickup truck right now. I mean, there's all sorts of sensors and all this. So isn't this just the way things are going? Period.
The question then becomes, in my mind, is it the way things should be going? What's the trade-off?
Uh-huh.
With all the other I'm trying to think of the right words. Do everything becomes, if I do this, what do I lose by doing it?
Yeah.
So we've got sensors, we've got software. I can really understand somebody, one of the majors, whether it's New Holland or John Deere or Massey Ferguson, or in the automobile business, whether it's Audi, Mercedes, Chevrolet, General Motors, Tesla, even Tesla. I can understand. We put this investment in. We want to make we have a right to return. And also there's stuff that people can really screw up if they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's the argument being made by the machinery manufacturer is this is not a John Deere 4020. For God's sakes, there's 11 different computers just in the cab. I mean, and there's all this stuff. And you're talking about a very complex piece of equipment that might be a $500,000 piece of equipment. And you can't just have some guy with a 3/4 inch wrench out here beating on stuff. This is a little more complex. So I see the manufacturer's point and I see the farmer's point that, hey, wait, man, you're removing my ability to even do stuff. So I guess let's start with the manufacturer, since that's where you were already going. They have an amazing investment, R&D. They are making machines better. And I know that I have to hear from the old people, "Oh, well, I don't make them like I used to." Well, again, they make them a lot better. The Ford 3000 from 1964 that I had to start driving when I was an 8-year-old kid had a muffler under my left foot. It melted my shoes. It was loud. Like I said, it was not practical. Didn't have hydrostatic. Didn't have front wheel assist. I can go on and on about compared to the 5-year-old Kubota utility tractor that I have right now, which has 20 horsepower less than the Ford 3000 had, and is probably 2 times as capable, 2 times more practical, at least double the efficiency in terms of fuel and productivity of per gallon of diesel used. I can go on and on and on. So I don't see a problem with the advancement of machinery. I'll throw it to you. What is the problem with the advanced
problem
machinery?
is what happens when there is a problem.
Okay.
Now, if, and this, I leaned on some friends who are in farming, so I hope I'm getting this all right. in terms of terminology. That's fine in the winter when you're in the barn, when you're in the barn, it's between time. But what happens, we talked about earlier, what it talked about in some of the articles I sent you, what happens when it's fall and you're trying to get the crop in and the weather's moving in and suddenly that tractor breaks down and you can no longer, you don't even have access to that engine compartment or parts of the engine compartment. You can tell there's a mistake. You can call or a problem. You can call the repair, the dealer or the repair shop.
Yeah.
But it could be hours before somebody gets to you.
Yeah, maybe even days. So I understand the timeliness of it. But here's the thing. What if it wasn't an issue of legality? When I open that machine up, I don't know how to fix it anyhow. so what's the script? So I think I've wondered if the whole legislative thing, Fred, is misguided in that it's like saying, you know what? There's a law that says Damian can't fix the space shuttle. I wouldn't know how to fix the space shuttle anyhow.
Yeah, but if I've spent, well, you tell me, what is the average tractor on the average farm in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas? What do they cost? A new Deere or a new Kubota? It
depends on the size of the machine and et cetera, et cetera. But let's call it a few $100,000.
Okay, you've got a few $100,000 machine. So perhaps it would be better to say either you buy the tractor, come on in. We're going to sit you down with some basic mechanics.
Yeah.
And it's not just getting the machine. You're right. I have to have the tools. It's no longer that I can say, well, just whatever I've got in my tool chest, can fix this. Mm-hmm. I need special wrenches. I need software diagnostic software, and I need to know how to read it. Yeah. It may not be a question of I can tear this whole thing down, pull the engine out of the back, pull the engine, and start working on it. But I can certainly get this puppy. It's something that gets me to allow me to get the job done, or at least give the repair shop a better shot at what's actually wrong. If I'm looking at a bunch of things, I haven't been in the screen of a modern tractor, so I can't tell you. But my understanding is it gives you a lot of information.
You're knowing about your topography. You're talking about yields. You're talking about slippage on your tires. You're talking about there's so much data and information being pumped through that thing right now. It would absolutely boggle your neighbors that are not ag people that have not been in the machines right there. So yeah, they're obviously advanced pieces of equipment.
Yeah. So, but you may not be able to make. Now, the system may be able to tell by a satellite link, since most of them have that now, may be able to say to the repair shop, hey, I've got this problem. But one of the things I've done a lot of work on is on the factory floor, maintenance, predictive maintenance. And
you're talking about machines that are used in manufacturing, which, again, in a rudimentary situation, that's like we go to a third world country, it's very rudimentary. But the manufacturing that happens in America's factory floors today is about like these tractors we're talking about.
Right.
You're talking about CAD systems, and you're talking about, you're not just some guy like when I worked at the factory, grabbing some ceiling tiles and stick them in a box. It's like these machines, you're a factory worker now, you're running machines.
And the ability, it's not just diagnosing the problem, because when you have a problem, something upstream may cause it, something downstream may be affected by it. Mm-hmm. So when you're the maintenance guy at the Nabisco factory, one of the four Nabisco Oreo cookie factories in this country, okay, yeah. Truth in advertising. I worked on the diagnostic and maintenance system for the Oreo cookie.
And I bet you it's when you walked into that factory, as opposed to, imagine if you worked in a rendering plant, it stinks terrible. You walk into the Oreo cookie plant, it probably smells good
for the first day. After that, You don't want to see chocolate. You want a
Okay,
nice,
so
healthy.
let's talk about these
So,
machines.
but any machine, whether it's a tractor, a car, these machines on the line, when there's a problem, it's a problem that goes upstream, downstream. There's a specific problem. You may have a leaky valve. You may have whatever, but that leaky valve may be related to maybe on a pump, which is passing hydraulic fluid, which then starves another piece, and it was originally caused upstream. And by the time you get to it, you've got to be able to see that whole range of the problem. I'm not sure. You can tell me. Are the diagnostics that you have available, that the farm operator has available to them sitting in that cab, going to tell him that all those are the problem? Or are they simply going to say, you got a leaky valve?
Yeah.
Or there's insufficient loss?
Sure. There's the issue that what you're saying is the issue that you're pointing out is, wait a minute, what am I really hearing here? Am I seeing everything? Well, and this again, though, a trained technician will see all of the problems, and the guy that's a farm operator can't reasonably be expected to be a highly trained technician. So that's where I keep going to the point. And does it even matter? Does the right to repair thing even matter? Is it more a matter? I want to get to this, but I also have to take a break here. I guess what I'm going to ask you, Fred, is it more about principle or practicality? Before I get into that, I want to tell my friends here about AgVisor Pro. Right now, you have a smartphone. And my buddy that works for Google told me 5 years ago, he says, these smartphones are smarter than the Apollo program. So you got all this ability right here, speaking of technology, like Fred and I are. So the question is, what if you could use your smartphone to make yourself smarter and save yourself hassles? And you can do that with a simple app. AgVisor Pro is an app that lets you use the smartness in the smartphone to find other people who are smart to save you time and distance. My buddy Rob Syke began a company called AgVisor Pro. He's an ag entrepreneur. He always says, if you can shorten time and distance, you will be more successful. AgVisor Pro is an app that does that. Put it on your smartphone, and basically you connect with to get advice. You'll find professionals, and you'll find services that you need to move forward with your problem. You know what? 19% of the time you spend, if you're a farmer, is seeking answers to questions you have. Why not shorten that time and distance by using AgVisor Pro? It's a network of experts in agriculture. And if you have expertise, you can be an expert. Upload your profile, put it out there, and people can seek you out. You can even get paid for doing so. AgVisor Pro, it's an app. Put it on your smartphone. Make yourself smarter by connecting to other smart people. It's a network of smart agricultural people. And it's right there in your hands in that smartphone you have. Okay. Is it a matter of principle? Because I guess I keep going back to this whole thing of, I'd like the idea. I'd like to be able to fix my own equipment. But the reality is I don't even have the technical expertise or the technical ability. And like you said about the equipment, my understanding is these service trucks that are running around the countryside taking care of the tractors and the combines, there's like $500,000 of diagnostic equipment on this service truck because it's not something that you could have or I could have or my neighbor farmer could have. So the reality is, are we talking about, does it even matter, or is it more of the principle? Damn it, I don't want to be told it's against the rules for me to start digging into my John Deere, my Case IH, my AGCO tractor.
I think there's a certain amount of principle but I think there's a certain amount of practical requirement. There's got to be. Maybe it's not all. Maybe certain areas will stay walled off. But I think if I've spent the money, if I've spent the investment, if I've got all the rest of it, all the rest that farm operators carry on their shoulders today, then I should at least have the right. I may choose not to have it. Are certain parts maybe it's like as the automobile repair people are saying up in Massachusetts, we don't want people disconnecting the emissions controls.
Right.
So certain parts may be walled off. But my impression from the farm people I've talked to, and everything is urgent. Everything is now. I should at least have the right to do it, and I should at least have the right to get a hold of the tools. I may choose not to, just go back. I may choose not to. I may choose to say this is not my thing. But from a principle standpoint,
yeah.
Yep.
I get that. Now, here's the other thing. There's also discussions about who's allowed to touch the thing, or then you void warranty. Now, I just say this because farms are getting bigger. They're consolidating, Fred. You know this, just like every commodity producer from aluminum cans to whatever is getting larger. So let's say you farm 8,000, 10,000 acres. You're big enough and you've got a big enough fleet. And maybe you have a great situation with your equipment dealer and they're like, hey, you're so big that if anything breaks, we're going to get our service guy out there right away, or we'll just bring you a tractor. But what if you're like the notch below that, maybe 2 notches below that? You're not so big that you're top of the list for the dealership, or you know, whatever, or your machines are just a touch older. But maybe you're big enough that you and your 3 neighbors say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to hire a technician to be our guy and work for all of us. And that guy we're going to send to the training and all that. And now you're not talking about, just the tractor driver out there with a wrench. You're talking about a trained technician. And it's my understanding that some of the rules would prohibit that from happening. You void warranty, even if it's your trained guy that keeps all of your fleet going.
Yes, if you touch it. And it seems to me, why shouldn't you have the right to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I can see
and
that.
not only that, that's not a bad thing from a business standpoint. It's a potential way. It can potentially be monetized. If I have to be a certified mechanic, if the Deere people said, okay, you guys can do that, but he's got to come in here. He's got to pass our certification program, which you do, and you got to pay for the tools we're going to supply him with.
Right. And then they might say, well, then there's no real benefit. But at least then, now here's the thing. You and I are recording this right now. I'm using my Apple MacBook Pro. There's things about Apple I don't like. I think that they're every bit as monopolistic as anybody. When I commented years ago when there was the march against Monsanto, Mike, these people that are marching against Monsanto, if they would just go to the Apple store, this is 10 times the racket that Monsanto's been able to pull off. But anyway, if I start digging into my Apple MacBook Pro because it doesn't work, and then I say, I can't get it fixed, and I take it to the Genius Bar at the Apple store, very arrogant, by the way, they would say, hey, dude, you try to fix this yourself? There's no warranty now. You can't just start digging into it. So it's a similar thing.
Absolutely. It's part of that continuum. As a matter of fact, there's a computer manufacturer now, Framework, which is going in the opposite direction. They're opening up the box. You can buy a laptop from them. Mm-hmm. You can assemble it yourself when you get it. It is designed, and it's designed to be non-obsolete. In other words, there's a new processor out there. The bus is designed so that you can just open it up, pull out the processor, and they're doing fine.
Yeah, now that's the other thing that, we've always heard about growing up is that planned obsolescence. They're going to keep making the next thing different, so where the other one, is phased out and you have no choice but to buy. I don't really know that that's the case with farm machinery. It's gotten, again, more efficient, bigger, better, all those kind of things. Big question here. You're coming out from the software side, which is 20, 30, 40 years ahead of it. But now all of the things you've grown up doing, your AI professor story, that stuff's now in my tractor cab. So, and the truth is, tractors and farm machinery are ahead of Main Street. We had tractors that drove themselves 15 years ago, and they're still experimenting with that with cars. So the reality is, ag's kind of at the forefront of this. Is this where we're going to be with cars? Am I going to get to where I can't touch my own car? I'm not allowed to. If I do, it voids a warranty?
Yeah, you're already there. You're already there.
Mm-hmm. What about then we talked about the practicality of it. Do you think that some of this rage is kind of almost like the Monsanto thing? Because I remember 20 some years ago, people will say, Damian, you're a farmer. Now, is it true that farmers they have to buy their seed from Monsanto or they get sued? And I said, no, because they completely sort of misunderstood what was going on there. Monsanto was a pioneer in the technology of genetically engineered crops. They said, if you buy our stuff, you can't then clean the soybeans and replant them next year. You've got to buy new stuff because otherwise you're basically pirating our in intellectual property. And then a bunch of farmers broke that rule and then got sued. And then obviously the mainstream press comes in and says farmers are being forced to do this. I'm like, no, no, no. It was an intellectual property issue. But the average person on Main Street didn't understand that, so they marched against Monsanto. Is it the same thing? Is that a similar comparison or even a completely identical comparison to this?
I think there's some of it there. I got to be truthful. You got to speak the truth here when you.
That's why I brought you.
And the truth is that farmers aren't forced. You don't have to buy one of these advanced tractors. The price of, as I think the first time I exchanged some email with you, I sent you some pieces on the fact that used tractors, older farm equipment, is actually rising in price because people are buying it. Yep. Because they can do the things they don't. Nobody's being forced by Deere to buy, or Kubota or anybody to buy this new equipment.
But it's just that eventually at some point when you're out here with 30-year-old machines, you're obviously losing a step just because of the pace of the new equipment. We've seen this before, Fred, and eventually the resistors cave. I guess I should say, I remember catalytic converters. Damn it, I'm never going to buy a car that has a catalytic converter. It takes all that power away. We've seen this with, mostly it's environmental stuff, emissions fluid requirement, DEF, and things like this. Eventually, the resistance caves because they have no choice. Is that maybe where the manufacturers are playing the long game?
It's possible, but I hope not. I think your model of either people, is it going to be the farmers that a single farmer that wants the right to get into the guts? I think other than a few exceptions, that's probably going to be rare. But I think the ability to use independent, the right to use independent repair people, who may be more geographically easier to use, the right to buy parts, not from the manufacturer and not void warranties. I think that may be I don't think that will care. I think that's a reasonable expectation.
Okay, you're coming at it from another angle since you're the software guy and whatnot. Is this an issue that we wouldn't even hear about if there were 30 major manufacturers of farm equipment as opposed to 3 to 5? And that somebody in the machinery business is going to tell me, "Oh, Damian, you're getting carried away." Let's face it. Everything becomes somewhat oligopolistic. Airlines, there's 4 big ones. Automobile manufacturers, we talk about the big 3 here in the U.S. Well, now we have Honda and Toyota, but the point is there still are a dozen at best, 6 globally that control, the cars and the trucks in the world. I mean, that's the case. There's 4 big genetic agricultural companies globally. There just are. Would we not see this? In other words, if there was 50 major manufacturers of farm machinery as opposed to a few, would we not even be seeing this? Is this basically them kind of flexing their muscle?
I guess it would depend on how they were acting. If they were all going along the same line, they were all saying, we put our money into this. This is incredibly complex equipment. We want this to be we want to be a closed box. But if some of them were going, nah, you know what? We're going to go with a model that allows independent repair shops to be authorized to fix our equipment. But the problem now is everybody follows the leaders. So yeah, I'm acting from emotion here, right? I don't believe there would be any major detriment to them to find a path to allowing for more freedom.
More freedom to repair stuff. Okay, then let's go back to this other thing. Is this a bigger part, Fred, of, we call it a subscription society? there are automobile companies that are going to go from they used to sell you a car, then they lease you a car, and now it might be they let you subscribe to a car, and you just give $1,000 a month, let's say, to BMW. And then for this 30 days, you decide I want the BMW, and I'm not a BMW person. I'm very not a car snob. I drive a 5-year-old Ford pickup, but a BMW 325 this week and this month, and next month I want to drive a different one. Will it be there with farm machinery? You just subscribe, you just give a certain amount of money to John Deere, and then they drop off equipment, and then probably plug in a monitor or a some kind of a computer thing that then has your data for your acres. When that tractor goes down the road or whoever, you just pull out that computer and stick it in the next thing, so that it's your data on your farm stays the same, but the machine could move.
Yes.
Yes. With your background in technology, you say this is what's coming?
Absolutely. I mean, we already see it. You mentioned it with cars. It's going to happen with hardware and software, computer hardware and software. I mean, it's a convenience thing. Mm-hmm. Now, me, I like my 12-year-old Audi, but there are plenty of people. I live in Volvo Latte land,
mm-hmm, right?
And there are people buying into it right now. And I can see it, and I hear about it in other things. I would not be at all surprised.
So in other words, to be honest, I've been saying that this is what's coming to farm machinery. Maybe you shouldn't have $4 million of farm machinery sitting in the tool shed that gets only used a couple of months a year. Maybe there's a better way. And you're going to say, well, but I'm not in control and I can't fix it. And it's going to be like, maybe that was all an argument that didn't matter. In other words, this could be an argument now. And they're talking about passing a law. And I'm like, maybe 5 years from now, it won't even matter, because you're just going to give a certain amount of money to a company, and there's just going to be machines that just move around, kind of like Ubers, and then you plug in your computer. Is that where you think it goes?
Sorry.
It's all right. What do you think? Was this where it goes?
Yes. Well, to a certain extent. Look, in a sense, isn't this Back to the Future? I can remember one of the big shocks of my life. Here I was, this kid from New Jersey, and I wind up at Ripon College in Ripon, Wisconsin, between Oshkosh and Fond du Lac.
Okay.
And I've got my big old red 68 GTO convertible, and I'm bombing down one of these roads, and suddenly I'm behind something. I haven't seen a piece of machinery this big. It's early fall. I haven't seen a piece of big machinery this big since I saw one of the big Skyhorse cranes in my dad's yard. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those harvesting crews that comes, from north to south along and it was this giant combine that was being trucked out to somebody's farm.
Right.
You didn't own, and people would tell me, people at school, first time kid like me went to school with a lot of people whose families owned farms in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Iowa and Nebraska. And they said, we don't necessarily own a combine. Come harvest time, the crew arrives. Mm-hmm. They do the harvesting,
right?
Because it's just too much money for a farmer my dad's size to commit.
Yeah, and that's kind of where things are going now. I'm going to close out with this. Yeah, and I've been saying this for a while. It's about the money. It's a huge capital tie up, and I get it. You need it when you need it. I get it when it's time to, I'm a dairy farm kid. You got to make hay when the sun shines. I get all of that. Trust me, especially in a place that the sun doesn't shine that much, like northeastern Indiana. But legislation, you are more dialed in on this right to repair thing. And there's pushes for federal legislation. There's pushes. Some states have already passed it. Is it going to change? Is it, again, I'll go back to the thing. Does it matter? What's your take on the legislative aspect of this?
Well, I think there's already some pushback from the manufacturers. Tester is the driving force behind the federal legislation.
And Tester is, by the way, to the listener, tell them who Tester is.
John Tester, senator and farmer from the great state of Montana.
Montana, yeah, he's Montana.
Yeah. So, you'll have to get him on and you get his take on it. I think that some of the things we've talked about here could take the steam out of it. I think the steam out of legislation. I think the problem also is that people like Deere have been coming down hard on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've been instead, now they've opened up with the farm bureau.
Yeah. With an agreement. They've reached an agreement, private agreement, not legally binding, really. It's not like it was done through the courts with the Farm Bureau, right? That's kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So,
and tell us what that agreement was.
Basically, if I understand it correctly, it's an agreement to agree,
right?
To have a discussion,
yeah,
about what can be repaired,
yeah,
without voiding the warrant. What they can touch on farm equipment without voiding warranties, and putting themselves in Dutch and because it's not just voiding the warranties.
Right.
I've heard, now this may be blue state, hype, but that they've also threatened that some operators have been threatened with legal action because of what they did to equipment. So whether that's true or not, you'd have to ask Deere. But the point still is, they could let the air out of this balloon. I think you've broached some common sense things, and if they did that, probably the impetus for the legislation, the pressure for the legislation, would go away.
That's probably, and that's where I guess that's where I swear, Fred, that's where I think it's going to go. I mean, like I said, I won't say it's much ado about nothing. And if I had $3 million of farm machinery and I was vocally about this, I'd be all like, damn it, I own this stuff. But again, I keep going back to the practical part of it, Fred. I can't fix that stuff anyhow. And I don't even know if my hired man that, changes tires on my, on my fleet of vehicles out here can do that. So I guess there's some reality to that. Wrap up here. Where's stuff going? I say it ends up being a nothing burger a few years from now. We evolve past it. I say this is a blip in the technological advancement. This is kind of, since you're the software guy, I don't know. This is like 1993 or something in this argument. It's like at some point it's like, oh yeah, we used to think that was a big deal. It's not anymore. Your thoughts?
I think it goes to a middle road. I think that in the end, the major 7 or 8 majors that are in the U.S. Start to open up to kind of try and quell things by giving some measure of right. autonomy back to the farm, or at least some right for certified people to use parts from that thing. You talk about technology, we got things like 3D printing. Mm-hmm. We've got things like robotic vehicles, real robotic vehicles,
right,
coming to the farm. I talked to a bunch of guys in Europe. They haven't got a clue about what it's like in the U.S., but they're much smaller farms. They might be fine here in the Northeast. All of that, obviously.
Yeah, you generally don't have like 10,000 acre operations with 320 acre fields in
no.
Yeah, right.
In Holland.
Yeah.
But robotic, true robotics is coming to the farm.
Yep.
Obviously, with things like AgVisor Pro, we're going to start delivering. I hate to sound like an ad, but
yeah,
you're going to start delivering real expertise.
Yep.
Right to the man in the cab.
Yep. And fairly instantaneously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's coming. We may not get our flying car, the flying cars. There's going to be a whole change in the fuel choices that the farmer's going to have, and his ability to control his fuel sources, which is a major thing I know for them for costs.
Yeah. Well, when it was $5 diesel, it certainly was a major thing. Yes.
Oh yeah.
So I like to look at the future. Okay, give me your last one, then we're going to wrap it up here.
It's going to, the lasting future, I'm hoping that those of us that live off the farm, and by off, I'm using that in two different ways.
Mhm.
We live away from the farm,
And you
but
also
we are
live, and
dependent.
you also are, and you're also able to live because
Yeah,
of the
the
farm.
farm.
Mhm.
We start getting, I'm not talking about raising chickens in Brooklyn. I'm talking about we get a better understanding of what it takes to deliver
Yeah.
that to our plate.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we're doing that. By the way, you know what's going to be cool? You can share this episode of the Business of Agriculture podcast with all your non-ag friends and say, I was on there talking to this guy named Damian. He's like an author guy, writes books, farm boy, and all that. Hey, if anybody wants to look you up to dig deeper into this, you found me on LinkedIn. Is that the best way to find you?
Either LinkedIn or they can get in touch with me at fsimkin at smartfixllc.com.
F. Simkin. His name is Fred Simkin, Simkin. Fred Simkin. Find him. You can find him through me. You can find him. Go to me on LinkedIn, or also F. Simkin at
smartfixllc.com.
That's an email address. His name's Fred Simkin. I appreciate you being here. By the way, if you want to hear more about what's happening on America's farms, check out the great work we're doing over at Extreme Ag. I am the producer of Cutting the Curve podcast. I record dozens and dozens of videos with industry partners, with the farm guys that started Extreme Ag. It's progressive, forward-thinking farming operations. They're doing some really cool stuff, some product trials. Go to Extreme Ag. There's no E on the front of it, extremeag.farm, and check out hundreds of videos. It's all free just for your information so you can see what's happening in America's and actually some Canadian farming operations. Till next time, he's Fred Simkin. I'm Damian Mason. This is the Business of Agriculture. Hey, thanks for being here. This episode of the Business of Agriculture was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You've heard me talk about Pattern Ag because I think it's a pretty cool concept. New technology that allows you to predict the problems you're going to have and therefore treat them before those problems cost you money. What kind of problems am I talking about? Pests and disease. Things like cordon rootworm, sudden death syndrome, cyst nematode, and a whole bunch of other bad things that happen out there in the field that can cost you money. Guess what? Pattern Ag will let you find out ahead of time if the disease or the pest pressure is there, and therefore you're treating it before it costs you any money. What a great concept. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to learn more about their product, their technology, how it can make you money, save you yield, and also where you can find a rep that can come out there and do the work for you. Pattern.ag.